So I'm going to introduce our panelists. We're going to start with Steve, but I'll tell you who all is with us this evening. We have Steve Sychek from the Department of Corrections. He is with the statewide Medication Assistance Treatment Program, or MAT. We also have Justin Lensbauer, who is the Health Services Administrator for Prime Care Medical at the Franklin County Jail. William, or Billy Shoemaker, is a person in recovery, and really grateful to have Billy with us. As we were saying earlier, before we got on, Steve said so perfectly, you are so important to us, and especially grateful to have you here to share your story, and a really great story of personal experience with some of these programs. And we have Erica Bartlett, who's the Assistant Defender with the Defender Association of Philadelphia, and she's going to be talking about Philadelphia Treatment Court. And we have Steve Blanco from he is a criminal justice professor at Temple University. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop sharing and say thank you all for being here, and we can go ahead and get started with Steve Sychek.
Okay, well, thank you for being here today. So let's just talk a little bit about what's going on in Pennsylvania right now. So obviously with COVID-19, we have seen recent spikes in overdoses, which is unfortunate because when you look at Pennsylvania, we went down, the overdose death rate went down in Pennsylvania by 18% from 17 to 18. But now the recent spikes are taking us right back to where we were, many years ago. So one of the things that has happened in the Department of Corrections that has been a very big deal happened in June of 2019. And that's when we changed our policy where inmates who are being received into our state correctional institutions who are enrolled in a verified MAT program will be maintained on MAT. So what this means is that you're coming into the state prison system, you're on buprenorphine, you're on naltrexone, whatever, you're going to maintain that. The reason for that is basically the courts have said multiple times in multiple cases that per the American with Disabilities Act, that these individuals need to be able to stay on their medication, which I think all of us would agree with. But when we look at substance use disorder, opiate addiction, any kind of substance use disorder, it's a chronic disease. So we need to look at it from a chronic disease model rather than an acute care model. And I think, people at Department of Corrections would probably agree that many years ago, we were doing much more of an acute care model. Now it's more of a chronic care model. But if you look at chronic diseases like diabetes, like hypertension, okay, people who have diabetes and hypertension, approximately 80% seek treatment, okay? People with substance use disorders, roughly about 11% seek treatment. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the reasons I bring it in is that even though a lot of people are seeking treatment for diabetes and hypertension, they're still struggling very similarly to some of the struggles that folks with substance use disorder have. So for instance, adherence to medication, adherence to your treatment plan. It's very difficult to adhere to a plan, whether it's diabetes or whether it's opiate addiction. So in the treatment world, in the old days, you'd get kicked out of a treatment program for basically showing that you have opiate addiction by having a relapse. So looking at relapse, I think, is very important. And I think we need to look at relapse through a different lens. And I'm having some success in doing this at DOC, but everything happens a little slower than probably any of us would like. But I think that it's important to look at a chronic disease and remind ourselves the word chronic means it's going to be the rest of our life. We're going to struggle with this for the rest of our life, most likely, just like diabetes, just like hypertension, all of the other chronic conditions. So I don't know of anybody who got kicked out of their insulin treatment because they were eating too many potato chips and they weren't adhering to their treatment plan. And the same goes true with, I don't think people should be kicked out of treatment for confirming their diagnosis by having a relapse, when relapse is in the definition of addiction, a chronic relapsing brain disease. So we need to remind ourselves that chronic relapsing brain disease is in the definition. And that makes this obviously a lifelong battle, and medication is a very normal part of a treatment plan for a diabetic, for someone with hypertension. It's just a normal part. So my background is really as much mental health as it is drug and alcohol. So in the mental health world, medication was never frowned upon. If you needed lithium for bipolar, if you needed an antidepressant, if you needed neuroleptics for schizophrenia, medication is very normal, and the breakthroughs that are happening are very exciting. So when we look at the current list of FDA-approved medications for opiate addiction, we're obviously talking only about naltrexone, methadone, and buprenorphine. So buprenorphine is probably the largest number of people who are coming into the institution on a verified MAT. So most of them are coming in on Suboxone. Suboxone is just simply one type of treatment with buprenorphine. Subutex is another brand name. It's only buprenorphine, doesn't have naloxone in it. So naltrexone is an antagonist, where methadone and buprenorphine are agonists. Now, a lot of people hear these terms and they just roll their eyes and say, what's an agonist and what's an antagonist and what's the difference and how do they work? And the reason I bring that up is because I think it's very important to be educated on the choices. Naltrexone, better known as Vivitrol, has its place. We have many people that are leaving the institutions on Vivitrol. We have many people coming into the institutions coming in on buprenorphine. So that's just what the numbers are looking like right now. But one of the tough parts of being able to offer buprenorphine in a large manner is, we have 24 state prisons. So we need to have 24 what's called ex-waivered physicians. And you'll hear more about ex-waivered physicians in today's talk. But to be an ex-waivered physician, you can just take an online course and get to understand buprenorphine and how it works, and then you as a doctor can prescribe that. So getting an ex-waiver is a hoop that docs have to jump through. In my opinion, I wish the DEA regs were very different and we didn't have to jump through so many hoops, because right now physicians, they can write scripts for narcotics all day long, and there's no problem with them getting access to that type of medication. Whether that is oxycodone, hydrocodone, doesn't matter. Physicians right now can write until their ink is dry for narcotics. However, if they want to prescribe buprenorphine, which is a much safer form of a narcotic, you need to get an ex-waiver. If you want to do methadone, my goodness, I'm not even going to go into all of the things and all of the hoops you have to jump through just to do methadone inside a prison, getting it delivered to a prison. Injectable buprenorphine is somewhat new and exciting technology, but with injectable buprenorphine, the one out right now is called Sublocade. To get Sublocade delivered inside a prison, you would be shocked at how difficult that is and how much administration has to be done in order for me to get REMS certified in the jail system. So it's very difficult and frustrating because we need physicians in order to expand this program. But I think it's also important to know that the vast majority of physicians, when they went to med school, they did not have any courses taught to them in addiction medicine. About less than 10% of medical schools in 2016. So when I came to DOC, less than 10% of medical schools were offering any classes in addiction science. And that's an unfortunate part of the problems that we have in trying to get better access to treatment. We have a lot of physicians who get their X waiver, but they only are able to see 30 cases instead of 100 cases, or instead of 275 cases. So there's a lot of administration, there's a lot of, DEA, FDA types of things that we need to try and deal with. But one of the problems, and I think Billy, it'll be interesting to hear Billy later talk, is there's so much misinformation on MAT and misinformation on naltrexone or buprenorphine. Methadone has been around for such a long time. Most people have a decent idea of methadone, even though they probably don't truly understand what a full agonist is, where buprenorphine is a partial agonist. And that is a very important distinction. And that brings about safety features that buprenorphine has that other narcotics would not have. So a full agonist like methadone, that's going to be a much stronger dose, whereas buprenorphine, you get what's called a plateau effect, where it's only going to go up so high, and you can only get so much buprenorphine on those receptor sites in your brain. So I think misinformation is what frustrates me probably the most inside a prison, or even family members, chiming in. And family members, I mean, they obviously want what's best for their loved ones, but understanding addiction is not very easy. It is extremely complex. It is extremely difficult to understand the complexities between MAT version. So I'll be interested what Billy, has heard inside and outside regarding different forms of medication and really just different forms of treatment. For the most part, most treatment providers are still in abstinence-based mentality, and that's really not where we want to be. We want to be able to combine psychosocial counseling services with medication to have the best chance at having some success. Now, with that being said, I want to make sure that our time is monitored well. So from a time standpoint, I want to kick over to Kim and check in to see if it's time for our next presenter.
Sure, and I think we'll get to a lot more that you can talk about, as we go through with questions and so forth. But that's a great little tee up there. Thank you, Steve, for that. I appreciate it. Justin Lensbauer, would you like to come up to bat?
Sure, that's a tough act to follow. Thank you for having me on, and thanks to Steve Setchek for referring me to you. In Franklin County, we're kind of in the southern part of South Central Pennsylvania. Not a huge county, kind of a medium size, but we have a lot of traffic through, and we have pretty significant drug and alcohol problems in our jail, our county jail there. And so this kind of started for me back a number of years ago with my wife's dog that was a rescue, and it had some really serious side effects from a surgery. Had a major surgery done, and when I came home, she looked like she was going through the withdrawal that many of my patients at the jail were experiencing. And so when I called the veterinarian, he told me he was using buprenorphine to medicate this animal, and that some animals reacted very strongly to it. And so, like Steve was saying, this is a drug that's been around for a long time. So when I tried to research the form of medication they were using, it went by a different name. And there was a lot of research in the veterinary medicine on how this worked that was very different than any of the research I could find in the human research trials, as far as psychodynamic and pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamics of the medications. And so when I took this, I went back to the patients that I had that were struggling with addiction, and I said, what are we missing in treating you? And a lot of what came back was what Steve was saying. There was a lot of misinformation about how addictions happen and how people get treated for it. I asked them questions about their use of Subutex like buprenorphine, and they were very quick to tell me that you don't take too much of it because you can have really bad feelings if you take too much, almost like smoking too many cigarettes, except much more intense. And the fact that, as Steve referenced, if you relapsed or you had a bad day, that you would get kicked out of treatment, you didn't have that support. And so, not to minimize anybody's recovery in any experience, but my doctors told me I needed to stop eating bacon, among other things, as far as diet goes. And that was a huge struggle for me. And bacon's not really an addictive substance, so to speak. So if I was having trouble stopping eating bacon, then I can only imagine what it would be like to stop using something that was addictive. And so for me, having a cheat day, as they called it, didn't necessarily have the same life and death impact. But if I told my doctor that I was still eating bacon, the look on his face was one of disappointment. Now, I didn't get kicked out of treatment, as Steve was referencing, but still, you could see that there was a conflict for them. And so when we kind of applied that same principle, and it didn't really occur to me until tonight when Steve said that, is really what we did is we looked at it and said, okay, if you're using drugs or you relapse, this is a cheat day, and this cheat day could kill you. If a diabetic has a cheat day, or somebody who's on a specialized diet is on a cheat day, it could kill them. And so, if we kind of look at it from a personal trainer perspective, if we look at it as a life coach perspective, dare I say, as a mental health provider, it kind of changes the stigma from, okay, yes, this is not necessarily an acceptable behavior, but it also is understandable. And so we approached it from that aspect, and we started to look at how can we support people in recovery through the whole process, and then really refine our definitions. So a lot of the treatment providers that I was working with would have a set curriculum that people would do in a rehab or intensive outpatient or any type of drug and alcohol program. They would follow that curriculum, and at the end of it, the person graduated. And for me, if you come back to jail for any reason, whether you're using drugs or not using drugs, then you're not making necessarily great decisions. I had a family member that was an attorney before he passed away, and he told me that, usually when you have a DUI, there were 500 almost DUIs before that. And so the person that gets arrested for the DUI is actually paying the price for all of the people that they hadn't pulled over in all of the DUIs previous to that. And there are always exceptions to this, I understand. But for every person who comes to jail, you kind of look at, there are numerous periods where people have had a very close call where they didn't necessarily go to jail or go to prison right away. And so what happens to the people that are coming into the jail and the prison, and how do you keep them from coming back? So we look at anybody who comes back for any reason, whether they were using drugs or not using drugs, that went through our program as a failure of our program. And then we take that case and we analyze it to determine what is it that we need to support them. And so every person we go to very individualized and say, what do you need? What do you need to be successful? And we created a program that basically modeled that. And one of the things that occurred to us is that along with those cheat days, people have trouble. It can be very overwhelming to go to somebody who has a lot of letters behind their name, go into their office building, open the door, check in with the receptionist, sit down in a waiting room and wait for the unknown of what's behind the next door. And so I asked our warden and our treatment department, is there a way that we could eliminate that? Could we send people to an intensive outpatient program while they were in jail with people that were in the community, bring them back to the jail, and when they get out, they know how to open the door, they know how to check in with the receptionist, they know how to schedule an appointment. This is no longer new to them. It's no longer something that is overwhelming or an insurmountable obstacle. And it's something that's comforting to them because they've done it for the last 8 to 12 weeks. And so we were shocked. We were able to convince the warden, which is no easy feat, to convince security that we're going to take people in a jail. And Billy, maybe you can comment to this as to your experience with it, but security is not a fan of letting people out of jail to interact with people in the community and then bring them back into the facility after being exposed to people without having somebody watch them. And we were able to talk our security into doing that. They were able to we were able to facilitate that. And our outcomes were shockingly successful. And so when Steve had mentioned he put out through the buprenorphine, we were kind of poised to be able to use this as our next step and be able to initiate or continue people that were taking buprenorphine. And Steve was kind enough to send us people that were already on it. And we were put in a position where we needed to continue it, because our policies and protocols are, if you're on the medication at state prison, you need to continue it, because eventually you're going to go back. And so we had to give people buprenorphine, and it got officers and it got custody staff used to this medication being within inside the facility. And then we were able to expand upon that to then have people coming in from the community continue it. And so that's been really, really awesome. And then this past week, we started inductions of people that haven't been on it, are going to be getting out of jail relatively soon back into the community. And so we're starting them on that medication and making those connections. COVID has certainly created new hurdles for us and caused us to have to rethink how we make those connections. But so far, we've been able to keep people in recovery at a much better success rate than we were previously, because in my opinion, and it's my own personal opinion, just making those connections. So that's kind of our story. I don't know if anybody had any questions, but I didn't want to take up too much time, so.
Thank you so much, Justin. I appreciate it. I think we'll get to questions at the end. That way we'll kind of turn it over to the whole panel to have a conversation. I know some of them I'll ask you specifically, but we'll get to those in a bit. But I want to get to Billy. I think we're all very anxious to hear from you, Billy, and really, again, appreciate you being here to share your experience with us.
All right, thank you. So like I said, you guys are going to have to help me out here and tell me what you want, like, of my story, if you want to hear what you want to hear. But I don't know, but my county, Fayette County, we have, and especially in my county jail, we have absolutely nothing like this program, or really any programs. They have like an NA meeting, but I'm not trying to bash the meeting, but it's lousy. Like, it didn't do nothing. The only people that wanted to go was people that wanted to get off the block for no reason, just to get out of the cells. But yeah, my county's pretty terrible, and it was a really rough stop. And the biggest thing that helped me is my mom not giving in to me. And like, when I was on the streets and stuff, she'd always give in, and it just enabled me to do whatever I wanted. So when she finally quit giving in and I went up state prison, they had a program there. It was a TC program. It's therapeutic community, and it was the best thing that ever happened, and it saved my life. I've been in and out of treatments, but like I said, they don't give you anything whenever you go in the county. In my place, they give you, I don't know if you guys ever heard of Equilibrium, but it don't do nothing for you. But this program here you guys are explaining, it sounds like it'll help people a lot better, because it definitely was pretty rough just going in there and that's it, cold turkey. And people that actually do go there that will get in trouble, you know what I mean, for something else even possibly, and then they get their medication taken away from them, it's just going to be really rough on them. But the TC program that I went through, it was two ladies that it was every day. Every day they could be, at least, and they really helped me. They knew their stuff. They taught us from the books and from their shall I say, their past with other people, you know what I mean. But I don't know. I was the type I never wanted to do anything myself, and they kept pushing me, and they made me realize that I can do better. I remember she made a comment to me before. My sister at the time, she only had a boy, and I said that I wanted to be a good role model for him. And she kept saying, well, what's a role model to you? And it wasn't me at the time, you know what I mean? So she had me go back and sit there and really think and write about it. And for people in recovery, to me, time time. It's just time and people. I couldn't stay away from the friends and, you know, running and just doing the terrible things that I was doing. And going to prison actually was the best thing. Like I said before, it was the best thing for me. And the programs that I went through, I also followed up with a, it was called the THU. It's a transitional housing unit. That had a lot more to offer than just TC, because TC was only one program and one block, but it was 90-day. And the transitional housing unit would get you ready for the outside. And they had a lot more programs. They would teach you and everything. But I've been through the Suboxone clinics and things like that. Never the methadone, but my thing that I always got to say, it's about the people and the help, because my Suboxone clinic that I went to, it seems like they didn't want to help you. They didn't talk to me. Like I learned a lot from what Steve said about, like I was learning from what he said. I didn't know anything about that stuff. They don't explain it. If you have a good doctor or someone willing to explain how the stuff works and what it does and how it should be used, is a lot more helpful. I didn't have that, and nor did I care to listen, but maybe if someone would have took the time, you know, it would have been different, because that's how I feel I learn, is if someone has the faith in me, and then I, you know, I give back, and I'm just so happy to where I am today. I don't know what more you guys want me to share. I don't, if you can help me out here, if you have any questions right now.
That's really helpful, and I really appreciate so many of the things that you said. One, that, and again, from the mom's perspective, I appreciate that you said that your mom had to make the hard choice to, you know, not soften the blow anymore, right? And
Right. I don't know how far you guys want me to go into this, but
please go ahead.
my mother, she works at SCI Fayette, and she's been around the inmates and the people in and out for the last 15 years probably. So she knows, she sees what it is, and she didn't want me to go through that, but yet it took her to make me go through that to realize what needed to happen. I was asked to tell my story about since I've been out of jail. Like I said, I don't know what you guys want me to share, but since I've been out, I've been clean for 3 years now, and everything's different for anybody. Like some things may work, the Suboxone for one and methadone for another, and just me, I had to do what I had to do, and I was just cold turkey for me, which was, like I said, rough. But whenever I got out, I got with my girlfriend, and my home plan was, my mother owns the house, but my buddy was living here, and that was my home plan. And we lived together for a few months. Everything was going good, and we eventually, he moved out and I stayed here, and I ended up having kids, and I ended up having twins, and both twin boys. One ended up passing away a couple days before birth, and everybody asked about like relapse about that, because a lot of relapses are major things in life and people passing away and stuff. And it just, I know who I was before, and I just don't want to go back to that. I'd be in a lot worse spot going back to that than staying strong for my boy now, and my girlfriend as well.
Wow.
I don't know if you have any more questions.
Thank you.
That's
so much
powerful.
for that. Yeah.
Powerful.
Thank
you.
Thank God you're in a program, you know, and you're taking care of yourself. That's amazing.
And congrats, Billy, 3 years clean. That's
Thank
great.
you.
It's huge.
Sorry for being nervous.
You are all good.
You're good.
We will definitely be
You were
getting
great.
back to you.
You were great.
We'll be getting
Thank
back to you with some questions, Billy. No worries. I want to turn it over to Erica Bartlett now to talk about Philadelphia Drug Court.
Thank you, Kim. I'm really happy to be here. I am an assistant defender with the Defender Association, which is the Philadelphia's public defender's office. And I've been doing drug court for more than 15 years. And drug court was created, it's been around for a long time, since 1980. There's a lot of drug courts across the nation. There's 31, I think, in the Commonwealth. They were created because traditional criminal justice did not deal with criminal justice involved individuals with substance use disorders very well. Maybe Steve Belenko can tell us the stats. I think more than 65%, or maybe it's higher, of people arrested for offenses have substance use disorders. And what traditional criminal justice would do, a judge would put up his finger and he'd say, I'm putting you on probation, and if you use, I'm sending you back to jail. And Steve Sychik and Justin, I think, talked about substance use disorder as a relapsing illness, a chronic relapsing illness. That means relapse is part of the disorder. Even people who are doing well in treatment, they're going to relapse. So in traditional criminal justice, you got a lot of people going back to jail because they relapse. And you got a lot of judges who saw the same people being arrested over and over and over again. So drug courts wanted to do something different. And basically what a drug court does is it tries to provide an incentive for people to get into treatment in the first place, to stay in treatment for as long as possible, and of course to provide a different response to relapse. Drug court judges are not shaking their fingers and telling people that if they relapse, they go to jail. Drug courts are guided by something called the 10 key components. And the highlights of them are essentially, it's an integration of drug treatment with the justice system. It's a non-adversarial approach. And what that means is the prosecutor and defense both have the same goal, and that is the successful recovery of the individuals. So you don't have a prosecutor who is in the courtroom looking for that person to fail. You have a prosecutor who wants the same goal as the defense counsel, same goal as the judge. Another important aspect of drug courts is that they provide an access to a continuum of care. We know that people in recovery need access to supportive housing. They need access to education, jobs, mental health treatment. A drug court tries to provide all of that. Another hallmark of drug courts is ongoing judicial interaction. A drug court team is led by a judge, and a drug court participant sees that judge frequently. And that is very, very important to the success of a drug court participant, because the drug court judge holds them accountable for their behavior. They have to account for themselves. And the other hallmark of a good drug court is that they hold the treatment provider accountable as well for the quality of care. In Philadelphia, a treatment court participant stands up to see the judge usually monthly, and right next to him is his treatment provider. And the treatment provider has to also account for him or herself as to what sort of treatment the client is receiving. So all of that encourages a client to get into treatment, to stay in treatment, and to do well. Our drug court began in 1997. It was as a result of about 18 months of negotiation and collaboration between stakeholders, public defender, the district attorneys, the first judicial district staff, the prisons, the police, and obviously the treatment providers. The goal, obviously, of a drug court is to treat the underlying cause of criminal behavior, protect society by reducing recidivism, provide an alternative to incarceration. I know that Billy said that the best thing that ever happened to him was to go to state prison, and I appreciate his experience, and I'm glad it helped him. Drug courts are trying to prevent people from going to jail. And the hope is that they can treated and monitored on the street. And another goal is that it saves money. It's much less expensive to put somebody in treatment than it is to put them in jail. The structure of Philadelphia's drug court. Drug courts are different all over the nation. Ours is a post-plea program, and that means clients tender a plea. They plead guilty or they plead no contest. The plea is held under advisement while they participate in drug and alcohol treatment for a minimum of a year. And if they complete the program, the plea is withdrawn and the case is dismissed. We think this provides an appropriate incentive for criminal justice involved individuals to get into treatment and to participate in the treatment court. We have about a 78% success rate, which is, I think, typical across the nation. We have a total of approximately 4,600 people who have been through our drug court. About 3,000 have successfully graduated, and our recidivist rate 1 year post-graduation is 9%. So it is a program that works and is successful. The eligibility requirements for treatment court in Philadelphia, and this is an issue that's very, very important to the success of drug courts, and that is targeting the appropriate charge and making participants eligible for the program, deciding on the eligibility criteria. In Philadelphia, we target felony drug sale cases. And that's the reason we do is because we're trying to reach street dealers who are dealing to support their substance use disorders. And we feel, and I think our success shows, that targeting felony cases is the kind of charge that provides the appropriate incentive for people to get into the program. There are other diversion programs in Philadelphia. We're lucky to have a lot of other diversion programs for lower level charges. I think the drug court model, in terms of providing intense supervision and a lot of judicial interaction and a lot of treatment services, really does well with high risk, high need individuals. Individuals who've been arrested before and convicted before and who've had prior treatment episodes and have failed. These are the participants that a drug court can really help. So targeting and eligibility is very, very important. In Philadelphia, after a client enters treatment court, they move through phases of treatment. The program is a minimum of a year. They attend treatment, they provide urine drug screens, they meet with a case manager, not a probation officer. And the reason for that is because a client in the Philadelphia drug court is not convicted. So the probation department is not involved. Again, we think that's very important to the success of a drug court because the case manager is the client's advocate. The case manager is trying to ensure the client's success through the program. And the client also meets with the judge monthly. The judge provides a combination of rewards and sanctions to encourage the client to comply with the program. An important feature of a good drug court is that jail is used as a last resort, and it's used very sparingly. And if jail is used as a sanction at all, the court should not sanction a client to more than 6 days. And again, jail is not used as a sanction for relapse. The drug court, as I said, provides a continuum of care. It provides detox, inpatient, outpatient, access to MAT. And again, a good drug court is going to allow people with substance use disorders to have an array of effective modalities, including medication. So there are some drug courts where the judge might say, I don't want people on methadone, I won't want people on Suboxone because that's just being addicted to another drug. It's not, obviously not evidence-based conclusion, it's not proper, and a good drug court is going to allow MAT. In 2008, the Philadelphia Treatment Court implemented a co-occurring track. So we have a separate track for people who have been identified at the outset with a co-occurring disorder. We feel like clients with substance use disorders and co-occurring disorders need a case manager with a reduced caseload size, particular specialized expertise in co-occurring disorder. We have the clients with on the co-occurring track scheduled on a different day than clients with simply with substance use disorders, so that we have flexibility in sanctioning, and clients with co-occurring disorders feel more comfortable in discussing their issues in a smaller setting with people who are trained in their disorder. So again, having a mental health track in a drug court is the kind of thing that ensures success. Our court is often called the clapping court because we clap for everything. A study was done of the Philadelphia Drug Court a while back, and it was determined that positive reinforcement works much better than negative sanctioning to enact behavior change. So we clap for everything. We try to give rewards for everything. We try to acknowledge any positive change in someone's behavior. And I think our stats prove that we are a successful court. Thank you.
Wow. Great stuff. That is amazing. Thank you so much, Erica.
You're welcome.
Stephen Belenko, are you ready to tell us what we might have missed so far and what else you can share about some of those statistics? And I'm wondering too, if you can, Erica mentioned the success rates, and I wonder if you can talk about how that compares to someone, you know, in general terms, who has a substance use disorder, what you know, relapse looks like. I know it's like they kind of look at 1 year, 5 years, and so on. I don't know if there's any way to kind of compare, but it just, those are tremendous numbers and really amazing outcomes.
Yeah, thanks, Kim, and thanks to all the panelists. Thanks, Billy, for sharing your story. And it's great to hear how well you're doing. So I guess, yeah, I guess I can answer that question a little bit. Drug court, I've been studying drug courts since pretty much they began in 1989. So, and Philadelphia Treatment Court is one of the earlier treatment courts and one of the most successful. So certainly compared to what happens to a person involved in the criminal justice system, the drug court model has been very successful, and the outcomes are much better than you see on probation or coming out of prison, parole. For example, for people coming out of prison, about 2/3 are rearrested within 3 years, and about 1/3, 35 to 40%, end up back in prison. So the recidivism rates in drug courts, been a lot of research in drug courts, and the recidivism rates are significantly lower than there would be on, let's say, probation or someone coming out of jail. So I think it's a great model. I think one of the strengths of that drug court model is that they deal with the person, the judge and the staff, all the staff deal with that person as an individual. Typically in a regular criminal court, you're basically a docket number and a charge and a criminal history, and you're processed in that manner. So what the beauty of drug courts is that the individuals are assessed and services are provided to, you know, to intervene with, you know, not just a substance use problem, obviously that's a core part of it, but also any mental health issues, vocational needs, family needs. So really addressing with case management and service linkage, all the other issues that can impede recovery. So a little bit of, I just wanted to give a little bit of context here, because traditionally in this country, you know, going back many decades, we have dealt with drug abuse and addiction problems as a public safety and in a punitive way rather than a public health issue. And the result of that is what you see in a correctional system where we incarcerate at a higher rate than pretty much any country in the world. Most of the individuals in prison have some sort of drug or alcohol problem, probably about 70 or 75%. We put them in prison, we put them in jails, we put them on probation under close supervision, and we don't provide a whole lot of treatment. And that's been one of the issues I've been trying to study for a number of years. How do we increase access to treatment? How do we convince criminal justice stakeholders and policymakers that that they need to deal with these issues and provide evidence-based treatment before people get out of prison or jail. Otherwise, we know they're coming back. It's just wasteful from an economic standpoint. It's incredibly wasteful from a human life standpoint. So that's kind of, in this country, our traditional use of the criminal justice system as the hammer to punish people who get in trouble with drugs. It should not be that way. We should be focusing on treatment, on diversion programs, on drug courts, on all of that. That said, once someone gets into a jail or prison, it's really very important for those systems to assess people's treatment needs and provide that evidence-based treatment. And things are changing a lot for the positive. Before, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there were very few jails or prisons that would go near MAT. There were TCs, as Billy went through. TC is can be a very effective model. It's kind of one of the strongest models that we have in prison systems traditionally. But there was a definite bias against medications treatment throughout the criminal justice system. And that is changing. As Erica said, that's changing in drug courts. So there are many, many drug courts now that accept buprenorphine or methadone or naltrexone as an effective treatment, as allowable treatment. And that's changing in prison and jail systems throughout the country as well. Now there are a number of prison systems and jail systems that do what Franklin County does, what Pennsylvania DOC does, in offering MAT to increasing numbers of individuals. And that's a great trend. I think some of that stigma is really going away. Maybe Steve can talk to that a little bit, but often wardens and correction officers, they have stigma and bias against people with drug disorders, but also certainly against MAT. But we see that changing as more of these programs are implemented and they are successful. I think one of the big challenges we're now facing is how do we continue, if someone's on MAT in a jail or a prison, how do we successfully transition them to continue with that treatment when they get back into the community, so that reintegration back into the community and the seamless continuation of MAT is difficult. And there's some projects going on, some studies to try to improve those linkages. If someone goes to state prison, they lose their Medicaid. They lose their Medicaid coverage, so they come out with no insurance. Although there are lots of efforts that Pennsylvania now is doing to ensure that they get back on Medicaid as quickly as possible. I know the Philadelphia jail system tries to do that before release, but in many systems in this country, there's a gap. So if you don't have insurance, even if you leave prison with some, a week's worth of buprenorphine, let's say, or prescription, many returning citizens have no way of filling that prescription or paying for it. So there's real gaps in how we continue that linkage, and we have to do better at that through better planning, through better connections with community-based providers. And I think that's where kind of an important efforts need to be made to improve that, so that the gains that someone makes while they're incarcerated can continue in the community. And one of the challenges I would point out is that if you come out of prison, for the most part, are you going on to some amount of time on under parole supervision. You come out of jail, sometimes you go on probation or you're sentenced directly to probation. So what we call community corrections, probation and parole. Those systems are not set up. Officers are not trained. They, for the most part, don't see their mission as providing services, whether it's social services or health services. And that's a big problem. We need to do better in terms of training, in terms of aligning probation and parole systems to support recovery and not just function as law enforcement, where they're basically trying to catch people violating their probation or parole. So that's there's a lot that we need to do in that area. So I think for parents out there whose children are on probation or parole, really, try to work with those officers to do a better job and identify and recognize, the tools and the services that are needed to promote and continue recovery. We need to do better at that. Not see relapse as a violation of probation, which is what it usually is, or parole. So very large percentage of new prison admissions are not for new crimes, they're for people who relapse and violate their parole, is sent back to prison. That should not be happening. The response should be step up treatment, find a different treatment program. That's where drug courts do really do a groundbreaking job in accepting relapse as something that's going to happen and use incentives and sanctions and the treatment system to respond to relapse, not just to send someone back to jail or prison. So I guess I'll stop there and see if we can get to questions. I'm sure some of these issues will come up again.
Perfect. Wow, what great timing. We're right at 8 o'clock. That gives us 30 minutes, and we do have a number of questions coming in. So I think we'll go ahead and get started with that. I think that this would be a good one for Steve Sychek or Stephen Blanco, or a few of you. So to clarify, can one only be on a medication-assisted treatment program in state prisons if that individual was on it prior to admission to the facility? And second part of the question is, in the county, one can actually be started on MAT if one was not on MAT prior to incarceration.
So right now we are only, if you are on a verified program and you're coming into our system, we will maintain you. Our next expansion is going to be new inductions. So Justin talked a little bit about new inductions, because I know that's part of what Fayette is expanding into as well, and to do new inductions prior to release, because right now we're doing Vivitrol prior to release. And just to go back on the Medicaid, because the Medicaid is a big deal. We make sure that everybody's Medicaid application is submitted and that we have a Medicaid ID number when they leave. The vast majority of our folks do have an MA ID number when they leave. However, with Medicaid, nothing is easy. So for instance, Billy comes out and he gets a job, okay, and he's working, and then he's going to lose his Medicaid. And oftentimes I'll have a situation where someone will call me up and they'll say, this reentrant just went to get their Vivitrol injection and they weren't able to get it because the Medicaid was turned off, or they moved from one county to another county. So if you move from county to county, it's an unbelievable administrative rigmarole to get that redone. And that's a pretty big deal. But thankfully, Pennsylvania has Medicaid expansion. And that means that Medicaid is the main payer for my population, okay? So just to talk about that, but one of my goals, and it's very high on my totem pole of importance, is new inductions for anybody that can benefit. So I wish that I could just make that happen. I'm working to get MAT into the contract of our medical vendor, which is going to happen here in a couple of months. So just getting the vendor on board as far as having it in their contract, because MAT is pretty much never in a vendor's contract. Now you'll start to see that, because we need that to be in the contract. But I don't have a lot of leverage right now with my vendor, because MAT, all of this is new. This is all additional. None of it is, oh, we're going to give you extra money. So there's some pushback because of just contractual relationships. But that being said, and I apologize for going down this tangent, but the majority of people to do that transition to the community treatment is very difficult. When you're in jail, and Billy, you can talk to this, when you're in the TC, it's got to be very different. The treatment in the TC, I would assume, is immensely different than the treatment out in the community. Would that be a fair statement?
Absolutely. It's totally different. And that's another thing I didn't touch on, was the Vivitrol. I always denied the Vivitrol because, like, when I would leave a rehab or something, I knew what I was going to do, and where my mind was is I wanted to go get high and use drugs. And I recommend Vivitrol 100% because Amanda Rhodes talked to me about it, and once again, it was something I didn't know about, and then everybody always said the side effects of it, and it could possibly damage your liver or do something. And it was always the bad that got to me, and then I would use that for my excuse of why I wouldn't use the Vivitrol. But yeah, right before I left prison, Amanda Rhodes got me set up to get the shot. I got it, and I followed up with it whenever I got out for 3 or 4 months, and I did have issues with the insurance and stuff, and like that. I think this program here you guys are putting together will be a lot helpful with things like that, and just everything you guys are trying to put together. But it was rough to try to keep up with it because, I didn't have a job right away and things, to keep medical and stuff like that. So that's something you guys said you was working on, correct?
Yeah, and you make an interesting point, because with Vivitrol, Vivitrol works for some people, and for
Right.
other people, it's not going to be their preference. It's very similar to like antidepressants. So, there's many different kinds of antidepressants. The most common are serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So whether it's a Prozac or a Wellbutrin, it's all going to be a little different. So I may do good on Wellbutrin. Billy might do better on Prozac, and, Justin may do better on whatever. Everyone's different. And I'm glad, you brought that up, that you've switched, MAT, and you've switched to something that is more geared to what works for you. And that is important, is finding the form of MAT that works for you.
That's exactly right, too, not to cut you off, but
no,
I lose my train of thought very quickly. There was a lot of things I want to touch on with what everybody said, but you're 100% right. Everything's different for somebody, and that's just what worked for me. And, the other options very well could work for someone else.
So Amanda Rhodes, you brought her up. She's one of my social workers. And, going back to what Steve Belenko was talking about is, the system is slowly changing. Amanda Rhodes is a perfect example of someone that is helping me expand the program probably more than I ever imagined, only because of her passion. it's hard to explain to people on a Zoom call, you know, what kind of work ethic Amanda has, but good help's hard to find.
Yeah.
And I think Billy would agree with me that Amanda is a very unique individual. I wish we had the cloning technology to put her in every single location because my program would be stronger. But the good news is that she's able to reach people like Billy and many others because of her passion. And, you know, slowly but surely, you know, we are coming out of the dark ages, going back to what Steve Belenko was saying, you know, as far as, you know, a lot of, you know, treatment providers, you know, they're not necessarily doing evidence-based programming, but we are coming farther. We are getting closer to being at a place where the criminal justice system, for various reasons, recognizes that the Americans with Disabilities Act made it very clear about the treatment of this chronic disease. And I'm just hoping to be able to expand this as soon as possible. But that's hard to do.
So if I can just add to what Steve was saying about how things are changing with medication-assisted treatment. We know they're changing in the jails. They're offering it more and more at treatment sites. And people are beginning to understand the effectiveness of it, and the stigma of taking medication is being reduced. But I have to say that often the stigma, often the feeling, the reluctance to take it comes from the person who has the substance use disorder, him or herself. So having people like Amanda Rhodes, having staff at treatment providers provide the evidence-based information to reduce the stigma and encourage people with substance use disorders to take it and continue to take it even after they're released is very, very important. Because I have so many clients who say to me, well, I don't want to be addicted to anything. And I say to them sometimes, well, it's like a diabetic who says, I don't want to be addicted to my insulin. That doesn't make sense. Or somebody with heart disease who says, I don't want to be addicted to my heart medication. No one would ever say that. So reducing the stigma not only for correctional officers and social workers and probation officers, but also the person with the substance use disorder too. Because sometimes that's a big hurdle, I think, just as Billy was saying.
I'd like to add in on this and kind of piggyback on what Erica was saying. And it goes to some of the things that I think that you, Billy, were pointing out. Steve's background is in mental health. Mine is in mental health. Amanda's is in mental health. And I think what's starting to happen is you're having more people in the mental health field are starting to gravitate towards treating drug and alcohol issues. My staff they are all licensed professional counselors or working on their license in professional counseling. And so they are not allowed to just look at a person that they're treating and say that this is a drug and alcohol issue. They are to treat the person in all of the issues that that person may have, and they are to work seamlessly with the medical department. So our nurses are involved in the mental health care. They're also involved in obviously the medical care. They need to know as much about medication and medication-assisted treatment, as well as all of the other things that may be leading a person down a path that they don't necessarily want to go, so that we can find somebody very quickly who may not necessarily want to be sober when they get out. And that gives us the ability to target those behaviors, to target those situations where people may be struggling with being clean or being sober or being in recovery. And so I think this also goes down to some of my academic colleagues in their need to really focus on the biopsychosocial model. They talk about this as a shtick term, but they really, the graduates that I'm getting out, and Steve, I don't know if you see this, but Billy mentioned several times that providers did not mention how the medications work, how the drugs work. One of the first conversations I have with a person that's interested in going into MAT is, what drugs were you using and what caused you to choose those? And we go through the biological mechanisms so that they're using particular drugs for a particular reason. And so we're able to look at that and work with them on, this is how you talk to a medical provider. This is how you talk to a doctor when you are looking to get better. This is how you work with them. This is what they're putting at risk. Understand those conversations. We practice those conversations, and then we put them in front of a medical provider to have that conversation. And our medical providers are somewhat skeptical about providing MAT medications. So it's a perfect opportunity for them to practice that. And if they don't get it the first time, we go back to them and say, what happened? What conversation needs to happen next? And I think what you're going to find is, if you really interview providers, if you look at them and say, what is it that you know about MAT? I remember when I met Steve and he would say, do you know the difference between an agonist and a partial agonist and an antagonist? And I thought to myself, we don't have the time to go over all of this at that moment. But it really did show, A, the knowledge base that he had and the passion that he has for making sure he's putting the right people in the place to make sure that we're connecting them. As a licensed mental health provider and having a lot of experience in treating thousands of people, I know the system, I know Medicaid, and I know the community system. So when we get into a situation where a person's about to be going back to the jail, how we fix this is we told the providers, you're going to continue to treat them because you're mandated under your ethics to continue to treat them, and you know how to get them medical assistance as well. So we gave the patient the information they needed to be able to continue this, and we made those connections and we had them sign up, but they can't complete it until they get out. And again, it goes back to having to make those appointments and opening those doors and making those phone calls. And so we're going to do what's familiar to us. And so let's make this familiar. And so we put this responsibility on the shoulders of the drug and alcohol providers to say, you are active participants in this. And if this person is not successful in their treatment, this is your responsibility now. We're trusting you to take care of this. And so if in a situation like Billy, he gets out and he needs assistance, and we make this offer to all of our individuals, if you run into a wall that you can't get over, then you need to call us back. The first question I'm going to ask you is, have you exhausted every resource we've given you? Because if you've exhausted every resource, then you've hit a hurdle that we haven't overcome yet, and we're going to put a wrecking ball through that wall. But I don't want to put a wrecking ball through a wall when you didn't open the door first. So they understand that, and we've had several individuals call and say, I've run into, Steve brought up, I got a job. I didn't know, I turned down insurance at my job when I had open enrollment. I didn't know that having a job was not going to make me eligible for Medicaid. And so in that week's time period, we told the provider, you need to continue to provide that treatment and we'll figure this out. And we created a funding source for that individual until open enrollment happened again, and we could get them enrolled in their insurance. It was a subject that we'd never encountered before. So that became part of our MAT program. We're going to talk to you about what full-time employment has and how to get involved in open enrollment through your insurance company and how to make sure you continue the treatment. And then to make sure that whatever insurance provider that your employer may have when you're on work release is accepted at the provider that you're going to, that we're connecting you to. So, you know, some of these things, making it less litigious in the community, so that if you are using drugs in the community and you don't want probation and parole. I know in Franklin County, for instance, probation and parole will reincarcerate you because they're responsible if you overdose, they get sued. Now, I don't know if any of those lawsuits were successful, but that's a major deterrent. So they want to play it safe and put that person into jail until they can set up the rehab. And then probation and parole is paying that bill. So it gets us across all the Medicaid issues and insurance issues. We don't have to deal with it. And so those are some of the things, those are some of the hurdles that the system has put into place, inadvertently trying to solve a problem, in my terms, that could have been solved a different way.
Great. Thank you. So thank you all for that. That was great. We have 17 open questions. So I'm going to ask all of you, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to actually ask our participant or our attendees to send me any questions that you have that weren't answered. If you know who you want to have ask the question, I'll forward it to them. Tessa, I'm going to ask you to put in the chat box my email address, but it's kim@college conversation.zone. So you can send me your questions, but I want to get to another really good one here. We have a lot of good ones. If someone is on parole and they want to seek inpatient treatment, how do they communicate that to their parole officer without the risk of being incarcerated or violating their parole?
Well, I can't fathom a situation where if someone needs inpatient treatment, that would be in any way, shape, or form looked upon negatively. Now, there might be some legality that I'm not aware of, but as far as someone who needs inpatient, now, there could be a glitch where you get a level of care assessment. Okay, so in Pennsylvania, you get a level of care assessment. And in that level of care assessment, let's just say it comes out that you need intensive outpatient. Okay, so Justin talked earlier about intensive outpatient that he's helping people get involved in. But if it says intensive outpatient and that person says, well, no, I want to go inpatient, usually the insurers, funders aren't going to cover a higher level of care. They'll cover a lower level of care, not a higher level of care. So there is a possibility that someone wants inpatient, but may not rise to needing inpatient, if that makes sense.
So if I could add something here as well, one of the things that a person on probation and parole might worry about is admitting drug use, which is a violation of probation. So they may worry about admitting it in order, to get the treatment. Now, if a judge has specifically ordered drug and alcohol treatment as a condition of probation, then admitting drug use and requesting help actually would not be a violation of probation. So it's important to find out if that was made an explicit condition of probation. And the second thing is, if you have a probation officer who understands the importance of getting treatment for those who need it, then it's very likely that that probation officer is not going to act on the admission of drug use and reincarcerate that person, and is likely going to get that person into treatment. Of course, a different probation officer may have a different idea, so it's not exactly easy.
I'd say also to echo off of that, I've had numerous conversations where people would call into the jail, like I had said, and say, I need help and I'm afraid to talk to my probation officer. And I know a lot of these probation officers from working in corrections for the last decade or more. And so I'll tell them, you need to be upfront with your probation officer. You need to tell them what's going on, because first and foremost, going around them is going to lead you into trouble. And this is about trust. And so they'll usually call the probation officer and we have a lengthy conversation. I tell them, you need to tell them that I told you that you need to tell them. And we have that relationship in the system. So when they call a probation officer and they say, I need help, this is what's going on, usually they're only telling me a part of the issue. They call a probation officer, they give them a different piece. And that probation officer reaches out to me because that participant dropped my name. And so we'll usually have a conversation about what can we do. So either I'll make a recommendation for a rehab or a treatment provider that might be able to help them specifically. But oftentimes what we find is that this individual is living at a house where there are drugs going on all the time. They're about to lose their home plan or they are in active addiction and they can't get them into a hospital and we don't have any detox centers. And so we'll work it out, or they'll come into the jail, we will detox them and we will send them directly to the rehab because it is the fastest and shortest way to do that. That is not an optimal solution by any means, but it might be the safest and the cheapest and the quickest to get past some of the red tape regulations that exist for some of these individuals and get them the care that they need. So having those conversations with probation officers, and especially with the way that the culture is going now, with training them in CIT, training them in addiction, training them in social work and case management skills, they're much more active and willing to work with individuals to keep them out of jail, because it's a lot of work for them as well. It's not something that they particularly want to do, at least the ones that I'm working with and know.
I got something to add real quick. And just, I mean, from my experience with my parole officer, as long as you're honest with them and you talk to them and you tell them what's going on, like you was just saying, it's in your best interest, you know what I mean? Not all of them are out to get you, but I think Steve Belenko said that, you know, some of them are just out to get you, which that's the truth. Some of them are just out to put you back in jail and not give you help at all. But there are some out there that do care and want to help you. And I was grateful to get a good officer, and I could touch out to him and I could call him for anything. I asked him anything and he helped me a lot through this too. So.
And Billy, knowing Amanda Rhodes, if you ran into an issue and you called her because you have a probation officer, it's the same way for people that I work with, a probation officer that attempts to put you back just because that's what they're looking for. The people working in the system, and I don't want to speak for Steve Sychek directly, but I feel confident he agrees, we don't take kindly to those kind of individuals. And so the entire system will actually rally around you. We've had this happen to numerous inmates. We've actually got involved, and that probation officer is either no longer a probation officer or they're reassigned to a different detail that does not have anything to do with this particular population. And so it really does involve a lot of people and a lot of stakeholders in getting everybody on the same page to be successful.
Awesome. Erica, can I throw some questions your way? I have a couple of them for you. Oh my gosh, where did they go now? Okay, we have a lot of them here. So sorry, let's see. Okay, well actually I'm gonna back up. This is for everyone who might wanna say something. I'm a nurse that sometimes runs the MAT cart, the medication cart, and I'm involved in some meetings. Is there anything you would suggest that I could do at my level to promote positive outcomes for the MAT program?
I mean, one of the things, you know, one of the reasons I love having someone like Billy on is to remind all of us that, you know, we're dealing with human beings and they need to be treated with respect. They need to be treated, and I understand that, you know, oh, they've broken the law and this and that, blah, blah, blah. We've criminalized drug use so much, you know, it's shocking that I've never been in jail from what I've done in my past. But making sure that we're treating each individual the way we would treat somebody out in the community. That one of the things I'm trying to get, you know, with, you know, equal access to treatment with chronic, you know, conditions is that we got to stop treating chronic diseases differently. We need to stop treating individuals differently. So just because you have someone who's incarcerated doesn't mean, oh, well, you know, they deserve it, you know, who cares, blah, blah, blah. And that never, ever helps. So whenever you see people who are, you know, not bought into the process or the system and not treating people with dignity and respect and what's in their best interest medically, you know, just always being an advocate. I think that's what I'm always trying to do, is be as much of an advocate as humanly possible without pushing too hard in certain ways that will get me into deep trouble. But, you know, being an advocate for this is, I think, very important.
Beautiful. Okay, found America. Sorry, they keep kind of jumping around on the box here. 1, how does someone get into drug court instead of criminal court? 2, can someone with cannabis use disorder be eligible for drug court? And 3, you want to start with those and then I'll get to the third?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So the Philadelphia Drug Court has 2 ways to get into it. Right now, 10 people per week are sent directly to drug court from arrest. So as soon as they're arrested, 10 people, their cases are placed in drug court. Referrals can also be made from other attorneys in the community and in the office for people with cases that may be eligible. So those are the two ways to get into drug court. And people with cannabis disorder, yes, can get into drug court. Before you enter Philadelphia's drug court, you have to be clinically evaluated to determine that you have a substance use disorder. And obviously cannabis would apply. Clients with substance use disorders that are only cannabis don't do too well in drug court because they tend to be low risk, low need clients who do not need the kind of intense supervision, case management, and judicial intervention that drug court offers. But they are eligible.
Just to add something quick, and a lot of, just to generalize what Erica was saying, in a lot of counties, it's the prosecutor or district attorney that's kind of the gatekeeper. I think it's less so in Philadelphia, but in other jurisdictions, kind of that initial referral most often comes from the prosecutor's office. So it's, sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing, because prosecutors would tend to want to send the lower risk individuals to the drug court.
Right, and sometimes prosecutors find a lot of reasons why a person is not eligible.
Yeah.
So it's more like keeping people out rather than including them.
But often a defense attorney can, go directly and try to intervene with the DA's office to advocate for a client, or sometimes judges, judges can, regular judges can make a direct referral. So there are often a lot of routes, but in many counties, it's the primary gatekeeper is the prosecutor's office.
Great. And one more question for you, Erica. How does someone involved in drug court get the help they need, especially when they don't have insurance? Are there clinics or rehabs out there working with the justice system?
So Philadelphia has two funding streams. They have one for people with medical assistance, Medicaid, and they have another funding stream that's really a bridge funding stream. It's a stream for people who don't have medical assistance. It will pay for treatment while someone is applying for medical assistance. So yes, a person can actually get into treatment without medical assistance, without insurance, but they're eventually going to need it.
So the one thing I'd like to just add to that is that right now, Pennsylvania, we have single county authorities, and the single county authority, there's one in Montgomery County, there's one in Philadelphia County, and those single county authorities have more funding right now than they've ever had before through the State Opioid Response Grant, or better known as the SOAR grant. So the single county authorities have a lot more cash than they've ever had in the past. And that is that safety net for that population that you're talking about. Those single county authorities are there for that exact reason. So I would really emphasize, using them as a resource, not just for referral, but also, case management and things like that.
Some treatment providers have a sliding scale fee based on income as well. So you can access treatment that way.
Okay, so we are right about at 8:30. So what I'm going to ask is, I'm willing to stay on. I only ask for a commitment of 7 to 8:30 from our panelists and from our attendees. So we will stop recording. We will close and say goodnight at 8:30. If any of you would be interested in staying on, we do have a whole lot of other questions. I totally understand if you can't. And I will ask people, and I can keep copies of these questions. So some of them were asked anonymously. So anyone who wants to stay with us, I will be here, totally up to each of you. But I really want to just take a moment to thank each of you. This has been wonderful. We obviously have a lot more to talk about. So stay tuned and let's stay connected. I'm very, very grateful to all of you. And Billy, just to let you know, lots of comments are coming in like, we love it. Somebody wants to hug you. I mean, I think we all are just on your team right now and pulling for you, and just so grateful to every one of you. Thank you all so much. I will stay on if anybody wants to stay on with me, but thank you all very much for being here.
Thanks,
I can't.
Tim.
So
Thanks for
thank
having
you.
me.
Billy, thank you.
Thank you.
So much. And everybody else, obviously. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. You too.